Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
It always happens in the same strange way. The second you stop trying, life starts moving again. The phone call you waited weeks for suddenly comes through. The solution that refused to appear reveals itself as if it had been there all along. Nothing external changed, something inside you did. The pressure dissolved, the field opened, and reality shifted instantly. What if that isn't coincidence but law? What if reality itself reorganizes the moment observation becomes effortless, when seeing replaces forcing? This is the hidden mechanism few ever notice. Why the universe bends not to control, but to awareness without resistance. It always starts the same way, with the quiet panic of something not going as planned. You tell yourself it's fine, that you'll fix it, that a little more focus, a little more discipline, a little more manifestation energy will set things right. But underneath that determination, something begins to contract. It's subtle at first, a tightening in the chest, a slight pressure behind the eyes, and then, like a vice, your entire awareness narrows around the problem. You've entered the trap of control. The paradox is brutal. The moment you try to force change, you confirm to reality that change hasn't happened yet. Your effort becomes the evidence of lack. The harder you push, the louder the universe echoes back. Not yet. You're caught in a feedback loop between what you see and what you resist seeing, a self-reinforcing circuit that turns every fix into proof that something's broken. This is where most people mistake movement for progress. The mind, built for survival, equates action with safety. If I'm doing something about it, it says, I'm in control. But consciousness doesn't operate by the rules of the survival brain. Reality isn't a machine you can wrench into compliance. It's a fluid mirror that rearranges itself according to the tone of your awareness. When that tone is tense, reality becomes dense. When that tone is open, reality becomes responsive. Try to recall the last time you forced something to work. A conversation, a relationship, a project. Notice how your body felt. Chances are your breath shortened, your attention scattered, your thoughts became repetitive and defensive. In that state, you weren't observing life, you were reacting to it. And reality, ever faithful to the vibration you hold, matched that tension, reflecting it back in small, precise ways. Missed calls, stalled outcomes, strange coincidences that kept you circling the same issue. There's an irony hidden here. Every time you declare, I must make this happen, you're actually reinforcing a separation between you and the outcome. You're saying, in code, it isn't here yet, and I need to fight for it. That energetic stance, that subtle friction between what is and what should be, freezes the flow of potential around you. You become like a sculptor gripping clay too tightly. What could have been fluid form becomes rigid under pressure. The ancient mystics and the modern physicists agree more than they realize. Both have noticed that observation changes what is observed, but not in the way most imagine. It isn't looking harder that shifts reality. It's looking cleanly. Resistance adds noise to the field, distorting the signal. You can think of it like static in a radio frequency. The song is still playing, but the distortion makes it impossible to hear the melody clearly. The universe, like that frequency, is always transmitting coherence. But only a quiet mind can tune in without interference. This is why control feels intoxicating, but never satisfying. It gives the illusion of power while secretly draining it. Control is effort born from mistrust. Mistrust in life, in timing, in your own presence as a creative force. You tighten your grip to keep things from falling apart, not realizing that it's the grip itself that's causing the fracture. And the moment you let go, truly let go, something extraordinary begins to happen. The structure of your reality starts to rearrange, not through effort, but through alignment. Of course, the mind resists this idea. It asks, if I stop controlling, won't everything fall apart? That's the survival algorithm talking. But awareness is not passivity, it's precision. When you observe without trying to manipulate, you give reality permission to show you its true pattern. The pattern was never hiding. It was just obscured by the noise of your interference. In the next breath, Imagine standing before that same unsolved situation, the one you've been wrestling with for months. Instead of strategizing, pause. Let your shoulders drop. Notice the space between thoughts. For just a moment, observe without labeling. Don't fix, don't push, don't measure. Simply see. That quiet seeing, that unresisted awareness, begins to reorder the probabilities that surround you. And that brings us to the deeper mystery. If reality reflects your state of coherence, what exactly is coherence? How does the energy of observation, not the thought, but the vibration beneath it, begin to stabilize the field around you? Because somewhere between tension and surrender, there's a frequency that rewrites what's possible. In a moment, we'll explore the vibrational field that lives beneath observation itself, the subtle resonance that decides whether your world scatters or harmonizes. Observation is not thought. It's not analysis, focus, or even attention in the way the mind defines it. Observation is frequency, a state of vibrational coherence between your internal field and the external one you're perceiving. The mind watches, awareness resonates, and resonance, not effort, is what instructs reality. Every moment, your body radiates measurable electromagnetic patterns. The brain generates them in rhythmic waves, and the heart amplifies them into a field that can be detected several feet beyond your skin. Science calls it bioelectric activity, but what it truly represents is a living broadcast of your current state of consciousness. When that broadcast is erratic, when thought and emotion contradict each other, the field becomes noisy. But when thought and feeling align, the field stabilizes, and that coherence subtly organizes the probabilities around you. You've felt this before, though you might not have named it. Walk into a room where someone is calm and open, and the air itself seems to settle. Enter a space filled with tension, and even silence feels sharp. Nothing visible has changed, yet the field has shifted. What you're sensing is the vibrational pattern of observation, the invisible architecture shaping every interaction. The trap is that most people try to think their way into coherence. They believe if they concentrate hard enough, they'll raise their vibration. But thought alone is too unstable, it fluctuates by the second. The heart, however, moves slower. It pulses with rhythm rather than narrative. When the brain's electrical waves synchronize with the heart's magnetic field, a state known as physiological coherence emerges. Studies from the HeartMath Institute have shown that in this state, the body functions more efficiently, decision-making improves, and perception widens. But the deeper phenomenon isn't just biological, it's existential. Coherence is the language reality understands. The universe doesn't interpret your words or your goals. It responds to the frequency signature of your observation. If your thoughts say, "I want peace," but your emotional field hums with anxiety, the signal transmitted is conflict. Reality mirrors the dominant vibration, not the verbal wish. Imagine holding a tuning fork. Strike it, and a second fork of the same frequency begins to vibrate automatically, without physical contact. That's resonance. Observation works the same way. When you observe without resistance, you strike the tuning fork of awareness, and the world around you begins to align with that stable tone. The outcome isn't created through effort. It entrains itself to the frequency of your inner coherence. This is why ancient meditation texts speak less about changing the world and more about stabilizing presence. The external shift is secondary. The primary mechanism is the harmonization of inner and outer vibration. The observer's calm field is not passive, it's directive. It doesn't force outcomes, it allows probabilities to collapse naturally toward order instead of chaos. A simple way to witness this is to sit with something you've been struggling to change, perhaps a decision that refuses to resolve or a situation that loops back on itself. Instead of analyzing, bring your attention to your chest, to the rhythm of breath, to the pulse beneath your sternum. Let the breath lengthen until you can sense both brain and heart softening into the same tempo. That's the entrance to coherence. It's subtle, often wordless, but unmistakable when it arrives. The edges of thought blur, the body grows quieter, and what once felt urgent now feels accessible. In that state, observation becomes less like looking and more like listening. You begin to perceive not only what is happening, but how it's happening, the underlying cadence of experience. The heart's rhythm becomes a metronome for awareness, keeping time with the unfolding of reality itself. And as the rhythm stabilizes, events outside you start to mirror that stability. Conversations smooth out, timing improves, random alignments seem to emerge from nowhere. Yet nothing magical has occurred. The field simply responded to coherence. Neuroscience adds another layer to this mystery. When the brain enters alpha or low theta states, those bands of relaxed alertness, the reticular activating system, the brain's perceptual gatekeeper, shifts its filters. It stops scanning for threats and begins selecting information that matches internal calm. What you see literally becomes shaped by what you feel. Observation is no longer an act of defense, but an act of resonance. This is the beginning of vibrational mastery, learning that the quality of your attention determines the quality of your experience. Observation isn't about controlling the field, it's about harmonizing with it. The mind will always try to grasp, to understand, to measure. But the field doesn't require your logic, only your presence. When awareness stops dividing itself between wanting and fearing, coherence returns, and with it, the quiet reorganization of reality. But coherence itself raises a provocative question. If awareness can align energy simply through observation, what mechanism allows that alignment to physically alter outcomes? How does perception, something seemingly private and invisible, touch matter? The answer lies in one of the most unsettling experiments ever conducted, one that revealed the universe may not exist in any definite form until consciousness witnesses it. In the early 20th century, physicists stumbled upon a mystery that shattered their most fundamental assumptions about how the universe behaves. It began with a deceptively simple experiment. Fire single particles of light, photons, through two narrow slits and record the pattern on a screen behind them. When no one observed the photons in transit, they behaved like waves, spreading out and creating an interference pattern. But when scientists placed a detector to observe which slit each photon passed through, everything changed. The interference pattern vanished, and the photons acted like solid particles. Observation, mere awareness of the event, altered the outcome. This experiment, repeated countless times with electrons, atoms, even molecules, revealed something staggering. The act of measurement doesn't just reveal reality, it creates it. Before observation, matter exists in a cloud of probabilities, potential locations, potential behaviors. Observation collapses those probabilities into a single, definite outcome. The universe doesn't decide until consciousness looks. At first, physicists tried to dismiss this as an artifact of measurement, a technical glitch, a problem of instruments disturbing what they measured. But over the decades, refinements in the setup only deepened the enigma. No matter how delicately they observed, the moment information about the particle's path became knowable, the pattern changed. Awareness itself seemed to be the determining factor. This is where physics begins to whisper the same truth mystics have been describing for centuries. Observation is participation. The observer is not separate from the observed. Consciousness is woven into the structure of existence. The collapse of the wave function isn't simply a mathematical trick. It's the point at which potential becomes form through awareness. Now, here's where things turn personal. You perform a version of the double-slit experiment every day. Every moment of perception is a collapse of probabilities. When you observe a situation through the lens of resistance, fear, judgment, control, you're collapsing reality into its most rigid version. You're deciding unconsciously, this is how it is, and reality, obedient to coherence, aligns with that declaration. But when you observe with openness, without trying to force or defend, the field remains fluid, allowing new outcomes to emerge. The same mechanism that governs subatomic particles operates in the quantum field of your mind-body system. Neuroscience has begun to trace its outlines. Deep in your brainstem lies a network called the reticular activating system, RAS, which filters billions of sensory inputs every second. What passes through that filter depends entirely on your state of awareness. If you're anxious, the RAS highlights threats. If you're curious, it highlights patterns and opportunities. In essence, your brain edits reality according to the vibration of your focus. This neurological collapse mirrors the quantum one. Attention directs energy. The more emotionally charged your observation, the faster the RAS adjusts its filters to match your dominant state. You literally see more of what you feel. When awareness is coherent, the RAS expands your perceptual bandwidth, allowing subtler data, synchronistic alignments, creative solutions to enter your conscious field. When awareness is fragmented, the filter narrows, reality appears hostile, and you become trapped in your own projection. Quantum physics and neuroscience converge here. Both show that observation is not passive, it's an act of selection. Reality offers an infinite number of potential frames, but your awareness chooses which frame stabilizes. This isn't metaphorical, it's mechanical. Whether you call it collapsing a wave function or activating a neural filter, the principle is identical. Consciousness shapes the world it perceives. Yet the most misunderstood part is emotional interference. In the lab, detectors simply measure, they don't resist. But in human experience, our detectors, the senses, the thoughts, the emotions, often carry charge. Fear, impatience, and the need to control add turbulence to the field, like static corrupting a signal. That noise distorts the collapse. Instead of clear observation, we get reactive interpretation. Instead of flow, we get feedback loops. Imagine two scientists observing the same experiment. One calm, one desperate for a specific result. The setup is identical, yet their inner states alter their perception of what unfolds. The same is true in daily life. When awareness carries resistance, it creates interference patterns in the field. Reality can't settle into coherence because the observer's vibration is fragmented. That's why the moment you stop trying to manipulate what you see, clarity returns. Awareness without resistance is like a perfectly balanced detector. It records without distortion. The collapse of probabilities becomes natural, elegant, precise. In that instant, life feels lighter, not because circumstances have changed, but because your observation has. So the question becomes, what happens when the observer introduces tension into this process? What if your very effort to manifest, to visualize, to hold an image too tightly, actually sends mixed frequencies into the field, commanding and doubting at the same time? The next layer of this paradox reveals a hidden error most people never notice, the invisible tension that sabotages the very reality they're trying to shape. There's a moment, almost imperceptible, when observation stops being awareness and turns into effort. It happens the instant you decide that what you're seeing isn't enough. You start to try, to visualize harder, focus longer, manifest stronger. The impulse feels spiritual, even disciplined, but underneath it lies a vibration of tension, and that vibration quietly sabotages everything you intend to create. This is the invisible error that collapses countless attempts at change, the assumption that intensity equals power. You've been taught that more concentration means more effectiveness, that stronger willpower guarantees better results. Yet in the subtle architecture of consciousness, tension doesn't amplify your signal, it splits it. It introduces interference into the field, the same way a trembling hand blurs a photograph at the moment of capture. When the observer tightens, the observed world reflects that tightness. You can feel it in the body, shoulders pulled forward, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the outcome, as if the act of staring could force reality to comply. But this fixation communicates something very specific to the field: doubt. The energetic subtext of tension is, "I don't trust this." So while your words or affirmations declare, "I am aligned," your frequency whispers, "I'm afraid it won't work." Every thought carries two components, content and tone. The content might be positive, "I'm open to abundance," but the tone may vibrate with urgency or fear. The field doesn't decode sentences, it responds to tone. In physics language, the content is amplitude, but the tone is frequency. A misaligned frequency distorts the wave. That's why resistance is so powerful. It doesn't oppose your intention, it modulates it, sending contradictory data into the quantum system. In neuroscience, this tension is visible. When a person tries to force focus, their brain shows elevated beta wave activity, a sign of stress and vigilance. The heart rhythm becomes erratic, coherence drops, and the nervous system shifts into mild fight or flight. In that physiological state, the body literally cannot sustain the vibrational harmony required for intuitive insight or synchronistic flow. The observer has become the interference. It's the same reason creative breakthroughs so often arrive after frustration is released. A scientist struggles for days, then has an epiphany in the shower. A musician battles a melody for hours, then suddenly hears it clearly after walking away. The release of effort restores coherence, allowing observation to flow unimpeded. The answer was never missing. It was being filtered out by tension. Tension is a kind of micro-control, and control is fear disguised as strategy. When you monitor the process too closely, when you measure every outcome against expectation, you collapse the field prematurely. The probabilities can't evolve because you force them into a single definition, the one you think should happen. That's why life feels repetitive under resistance. You keep observing the same pattern, not because it's permanent, but because your focus keeps freezing it in place. If you could watch your consciousness like a waveform, you'd see it oscillate between two states, contraction and expansion. Contraction feels like trying, like reaching out of yourself. Expansion feels like presence, the awareness that nothing is missing in this instant. The problem is that modern conditioning glorifies contraction, productivity, achievement, even high-performance spirituality all reward tension under different names: discipline, focus, control. The paradox is that the universe responds to coherence, not strain. So how do you recognize this invisible error in real time? The body tells you. It's a truth detector far more reliable than thought. When you notice your breath shortening or your muscles bracing as you visualize or pray, you've crossed the line from observation to resistance. Awareness has become willpower. That's your cue, not to correct the image, but to release the grip. Take one small example. Imagine you're trying to manifest a new opportunity. You visualize it daily, but each session leaves you slightly anxious. That anxiety isn't random. It's feedback. It's the field reflecting the discord between your intention and your frequency. The way out isn't to visualize harder. It's to soften your attention until the anxiety dissolves. Only then does the probability field begin to reorganize in your favor. And here's the twist. Even the desire to eliminate tension can become another form of resistance if pursued with control. The shift happens not by doing anything to the tension, but by noticing it without judgment. Observation cleanses itself when allowed to witness its own distortion. The moment you stop resisting resistance, coherence begins to re-emerge. This is where quantum theory meets emotional intelligence. Awareness collapses probability fields, but emotion decides how they collapse. If emotion is tangled, reality becomes tangled. If emotion is still, reality follows suit. The key isn't suppression, it's resonance. Every time you return to neutrality, you reset the experiment. So the next question naturally arises. What occurs in that split second when resistance dominates completely, when the observer's contraction becomes so strong that reality itself seems to freeze? Because that is the critical threshold, the precise point where flow stops and clarity disappears. The moment of collapse that decides whether your world expands or locks in place. There is a razor-thin moment, so subtle you almost never notice it, when energy stops moving. You're still breathing, still speaking, still thinking, but something in the invisible structure of your reality freezes. It's the point of collapse, the exact instant when resistance overtakes observation. You may recognize it as that tight feeling in the solar plexus, the instant your thoughts loop, or when everything you do suddenly feels heavy. The outer world mirrors it perfectly. Conversations stall, timing misfires, and even coincidences seem to dry up. It's as if the current of life hits a hidden dam, and that dam is built from the urge to control. In quantum terms, collapse isn't destruction, it's fixation. When a wave of infinite possibility collapses, it doesn't vanish, it just becomes definite. And when you observe through resistance, You unconsciously force reality into its most rigid form. You choose, without realizing, the least flexible version of events, because your attention is coded with contraction. The more tightly you focus on what you don't want to happen, the more that vibration stabilizes. Resistance doesn't stop creation, it just locks creation into the pattern you least prefer. You can watch this process unfold in the smallest daily details. A simple delay in traffic can ignite frustration, and that frustration alters your perception. The landscape shifts, colors dull, time drags, and the mind begins weaving stories. This always happens to me. In that very sentence, collapse completes itself. The field reorganizes around the emotional signal, freezing your probability space into repetition. But when you release the story, even slightly, take one deep breath, widen your focus, the flow resumes. The cars move, the tension dissolves, and reality's edges soften again. Physically, this collapse is measurable. Resistance activates the sympathetic nervous system, the body's emergency mode. Blood flow redirects from intuition-rich regions of the brain toward the muscles, preparing for fight or flight. Your sensory field narrows, and perception becomes binary, safe or unsafe, gain or loss. It's not that the world stops moving, it's that your awareness loses range. The wider symphony of possibilities still plays, but your consciousness can only hear a single discordant note. That's why, under tension, time seems to distort. Minutes stretch, possibilities shrink. You're no longer in sync with the field's rhythm, you're out of temporal coherence. In contrast, when resistance subsides, time feels fluid again. Moments expand, creativity returns, synchronicities line up with mathematical precision. Flow isn't some mystical current, it's the brain and heart restoring coherence, rejoining the universe's tempo. Think of it like tightening a camera lens until the mechanism jams. The image blurs not because the subject moved, but because the act of over-focusing broke alignment. The solution isn't to twist harder, it's to loosen your grip until the aperture opens again. Resistance is that over-tightening. The clarity you crave only appears when the lens relaxes into focus. This point of collapse is also a test of trust. Most people meet it with panic, believing the stillness means failure. In truth, it's an invitation, the moment life asks if you're willing to see without control. The energy trapped inside resistance is not the enemy, it's unused flow waiting to be reclaimed. The moment you stop fighting the freeze, warmth returns to the system. Awareness softens, breath deepens, and movement resumes from the inside out. The paradox, of course, is that you can't force yourself to relax. That, too, is resistance. The way through is gentler, to become aware of the contraction without judgment, to witness the freeze as part of the field's rhythm. Every collapse holds potential energy, the same way a bowstring holds power before release. The instant you stop resisting your resistance, that stored force becomes motion again. If you could see this energetically, you'd witness the entire field shimmer the moment surrender happens. Probabilities that seemed closed reopen. People you thought were gone reach out. Opportunities that once felt impossible realign with almost eerie precision. Reality never stopped moving. Your perception did. Once you return to still observation, the flow rushes back in like water through a broken dam. So the next time you feel that invisible freeze, when the day turns heavy or your thoughts harden into repetition, pause. Don't try to fix it. Instead, let yourself notice the moment collapse begins and breathe into that stillness without argument. The very act of witnessing tension dissolves its power. If this recognition landed for you, if you've ever felt that strange pause where life seems to hold its breath, take a second now to like this message and write in the comments, "I can feel when resistance freezes the flow." Let that sentence become your signal, a small declaration that awareness has returned to movement, because awareness, once awake, never truly collapses again. And as we look closer at this dance between flow and fixation, a deeper mechanism starts to appear, the bridge between mind and matter, the neurological mirror that translates observation into form. Every shift in awareness has a twin inside your physiology. The bridge between what you observe and what you experience is not symbolic, It's literal, electrical, biochemical. Your brain doesn't just record your perception of the world, it reconfigures itself according to how you observe. Observation isn't only a cognitive act, it's a full-body signal that reorganizes neural networks and electromagnetic fields in real time. Think of your mind and body as two ends of a single current. The way you look at reality sets the tone of that current. When observation is calm, the current flows evenly. Hemispheres synchronize, hormones stabilize, coherence rises. But when observation is saturated with resistance, the current short-circuits. The left and right hemispheres fall out of rhythm, stress chemistry floods the bloodstream, and perception narrows to survival mode. The external world appears disordered because the inner circuitry has lost alignment. Modern neuroscience gives us language for what the mystics have always intuited. When you observe something with clear, undistorted attention, your brain enters a state known as coherence. In this state, neural oscillations across different regions, prefrontal, parietal, temporal, begin to synchronize in precise patterns. Brain waves line up like musicians in tune with a common tempo. That synchronization isn't just pretty data, it's the physiological signature of conscious alignment. Your perception becomes fluid, your decision-making accurate, and your sense of time less fragmented. Now imagine that synchronization extending beyond the brain. Studies from the HeartMath Institute show that when the heart's rhythm becomes ordered, a smooth sine wave rather than erratic spikes, it starts influencing brain activity through electromagnetic coupling. The heart's field, measurable several feet from the body, entrains the brain's oscillations. The result is what researchers call heart-brain coherence, a measurable harmony between emotional tone and cognitive processing. In that moment, your awareness is not scattered through thought. It becomes embodied observation. Here's the astonishing part. The frequencies involved in this coherence overlap with the same bandwidths seen in quantum-level interactions. While the scales differ by magnitudes, the principle echoes. Coherence stabilizes systems. In the quantum field, coherent light can maintain its wave function over great distances. In the nervous system, coherent neural firing maintains psychological stability and intuitive clarity. Both obey the same law. Energy flows freely when patterns align. This is why observation changes reality. It's not that your thoughts magically manipulate matter, it's that your neural and electromagnetic coherence tunes you into corresponding patterns in the larger field. When the brain and heart resonate together, your awareness becomes a stable reference point, a phase lock with the probabilities around you. The field mirrors that stability back, translating it into ordered outcomes, coincidences, and precise timing. When coherence breaks, your perception fragments. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for higher reasoning, loses rhythm with the limbic system, which governs emotion. That misalignment produces what you experience as confusion, anxiety, or indecision. In that state, observation becomes noisy. The inner signal you're broadcasting wobbles. Just as static disrupts a radio channel, resistance in your nervous system distorts the transmission between you and the field. You can feel this dissonance directly. When you overthink, your body stiffens. When you soften into awareness, your breath deepens. These physical sensations are not byproducts, they're readouts of coherence levels. Awareness is constantly writing itself into the body. Every thought leaves a physiological trace. Every moment of acceptance restores electrical harmony. That's why a single deep breath can sometimes dissolve a problem that hours of analysis could not. You've re-established the bridge. Neuroscientists studying long-term meditators have found something else remarkable. Sustained observation without resistance produces gamma coherence, the fastest brain waves, linking billions of neurons across hemispheres. These bursts often occur in moments of insight or transcendence, but the key detail is this. Gamma coherence doesn't emerge through control. It arises spontaneously when effort ceases. The brain's most unified state comes from the deepest surrender. So when you observe without resistance, you're not being passive. You're engaging the highest form of participation the nervous system allows. You're giving the brain permission to reorganize itself into order. Every cell, every neuron becomes part of the same rhythm. It's as if the entire organism is saying, I see clearly, and therefore I am coherent. The consequences ripple outward. The clearer your internal signal, the more predictable and elegant your external experience becomes. People around you sense that steadiness, though they might not name it. Situations unfold with fewer detours. Even chance events seem to fall into rhythm. It's the neuro-quantum bridge in motion, a living feedback loop between attention and reality. Yet there's a deeper level of alignment that few people speak about, the one that determines whether this coherence can be sustained. It's the hidden conflict between the part of you that wants to control and the part of you that can only observe. The next step of this unfolding mystery lies there, where ego and awareness meet, a forbidden alignment that decides who, in truth, is doing the observing at all. There's a subtle line inside you, so fine it often goes unnoticed, where awareness turns into identity. On one side lies the silent witness, the consciousness that simply sees. On the other, the ego steps in, translating what's seen into stories, meanings, defenses. The two coexist within the same human instrument, but when their roles blur, coherence collapses. The ego tries to take over the act of observation, and the very mechanism that connects you to the flow of reality becomes distorted. The ego isn't evil, though it's often misunderstood as the spiritual villain. It's a function, not a flaw, a sophisticated translation device designed to map sensory experience into survival information. Its task is to interpret patterns, predict danger, and build continuity. Without it, you wouldn't remember where you live or recognize your reflection. But the problem arises when this translator begins to believe it's the author. When the ego starts observing reality on behalf of awareness, the translation hardens into a narrative. I must protect this identity. I must control this outcome. I must defend this version of truth. In that moment, observation becomes self-referential. You no longer see what is. You see what confirms who you think you are. Every new event gets filtered through the ego's archive, its library of wins, wounds, and warnings. This process is fast, automatic, invisible. You glance at a person and feel distrust, not realizing the reaction comes from an old file your ego just pulled from storage. The ego calls this discernment, but it's really projection. The pure observer doesn't reference the past, it registers the present directly. From a neurological perspective, this is measurable. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious regulation, lights up when the observer is active, while deeper limbic structures dominate when the ego is threatened. When fear or pride hijack observation, blood flow literally shifts away from regions responsible for empathy and broad awareness. You begin to see less of the world because your biology has narrowed its aperture to serve self-preservation. This contraction creates resistance, and resistance freezes the field. The paradox is that the ego believes it's helping. It thinks vigilance ensures safety, that control equals mastery. Yet the act of trying to maintain identity is exactly what disrupts coherence. The ego's energy is linear. It pushes, pulls, compares. Awareness's energy is radial. It expands in all directions without effort. When the two operate in harmony, the ego acts as the executor of what awareness perceives. It brings vision into form, translating inspiration into decision. But when it takes over the observing role, it starts editing reality to fit its own fears. You can sense the difference viscerally. When awareness leads, perception feels spacious. There's no rush to judge, no need to fix. When ego leads, perception feels tight, urgent, reactive. The same event can produce two completely different internal worlds depending on who's at the controls. A delay can feel like divine timing or personal failure. A criticism can be received as feedback or as threat. The outer circumstance is neutral. The alignment within you decides its meaning. Spiritual traditions have long spoken of ego death, but that phrase is misleading. The goal isn't annihilation, it's cooperation. The ego is meant to serve, not steer. When it relaxes into its true function, it becomes a translator of awareness into action, a bridge, not a barrier. The key is remembering that the observer doesn't do anything. It doesn't analyze, decide, or protect. It witnesses. The moment the ego tries to witness, it loses clarity, because witnessing requires stillness, and the ego survives through movement. You can test this right now. Think of a situation where you've been trying to maintain control, perhaps an unresolved conversation or a decision you keep revisiting. As you bring it to mind, notice which part of you looks at it. Does it feel like the witness, quiet, neutral, curious, or like the inner manager, tense and strategic? If it's the latter, you're observing through the ego's filter. Awareness isn't absent. It's simply hidden behind the noise of identification. In those moments when the ego relaxes, even briefly, something remarkable happens. Time slows, inner dialogue fades, and perception becomes panoramic. The world seems sharper, but also kinder. This isn't imagination. It's the restoration of coherence. The brain's hemispheres realign, heart rhythm steadies, and the field around you begins to echo that calm. The ego hasn't vanished. It's just fallen back into orbit around awareness, where it belongs. Yet this alignment comes with a cost: surrender. The ego must trust a force it can't measure, the intelligence of observation itself. For many, that surrender feels like disappearance, a dissolving of personal authority. But in truth, it's the birth of genuine power, because once the observer leads, reality doesn't need to be forced. It reorganizes itself naturally, following the shape of your coherence. And that surrender, that precise moment when the ego stops observing and awareness takes over, is the hinge where transformation happens. It's where control melts into flow, where effort gives way to effortless alignment. The next unfolding reveals what occurs in that instant, the field's immediate and astonishing response when the observer finally lets go. There's a kind of silence that doesn't belong to sound. It arrives when the mind exhausts every angle, when control finally loses its grip. For a heartbeat, everything in you stops negotiating with reality, and in that pause, something extraordinary happens. The energy you've been pushing against suddenly moves. What was stuck begins to unfold. The field responds, not gradually but instantly, as though it had been waiting all along for that precise moment of surrender. Surrender isn't defeat. It's not giving up your direction or abandoning your will. It's the moment when your attention ceases to distort the field with resistance. You stop transmitting mixed signals. You stop trying to make life agree with your picture of how it should look. Awareness becomes clean again, and the field, relieved of static, reorganizes around that clarity with astonishing speed. You've probably experienced this many times, though you might not have recognized it as surrender. Think about the instant a long-held problem suddenly resolves itself, the moment you stop obsessing over it. You've written an email draft a dozen times, then finally walk away, and the right words appear effortlessly. You've been searching for an answer, and the moment you give up trying, it lands in your awareness like a whisper. The energy never came from doing less. It came from stopping interference. The field was always moving. You were the one holding it still. From a physiological standpoint, this moment of surrender is visible. When you release control, the sympathetic nervous system, the circuitry of fight, flight, and effort, disengages, and the parasympathetic system activates. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and the prefrontal cortex comes back online. The body exits survival mode and re-enters connection. It's as if the internal noise floor drops, allowing subtle information, intuition, timing, creative insight, to rise into awareness. What feels like magic is in fact coherence returning. Quantum physics offers a mirror for this experience. When a particle is observed without external interference, its wave function collapses naturally into order. But when the observer introduces force, any form of bias or manipulation, the outcome distorts. The field doesn't reject control out of cruelty, it simply follows coherence. Force divides, presence integrates. Surrender is the human version of quantum neutrality. Pure observation that allows potential to choose its most natural expression. You can sense the shift in your body the moment it happens. Before surrender, there's contraction. Thoughts race, muscles tighten, time compresses. After surrender, there's an immediate expansion, as if space itself re-enters your awareness. The breath feels deeper, colors appear sharper, even sound seems to soften. The external world hasn't changed, your alignment has. The observer and the field are back in resonance, and the reflection adjusts instantly to match. This is why so many spontaneous healings and synchronicities occur right after letting go. The field doesn't need time to respond. It only needs a coherent observer. Once the signal is clean, reality organizes itself faster than the mind can track. The delay you often perceive between intention and manifestation isn't time passing, it's resistance dissolving. There's an emotional signature to this shift that's unmistakable. It feels like relief, but not the kind that follows success, the kind that comes from no longer fighting yourself. It's peace that doesn't depend on outcome. In that peace, your awareness expands beyond preference, beyond fear, beyond identity. You're no longer in opposition to what is. You've become transparent to it. And the universe, like light passing through clear glass, moves through you unimpeded. This is not passivity. Surrender is the most active form of alignment there is. It's the conscious choice to stop generating friction. When awareness releases resistance, action becomes fluid. Decisions arise effortlessly. Timing becomes impeccable. You act not from reaction, but from resonance. Every movement feels guided, as though the path has been cleared ahead of you. Sometimes this instant response from the field can feel almost overwhelming. Events synchronize so quickly that it challenges your sense of logic. You might think, did I cause this? But the truth is more elegant. You didn't cause it. You stopped preventing it. The field simply mirrors the level of coherence available. Surrender doesn't change reality, it reveals it. Yet within this clarity lies a deeper question, one that most avoid, because it threatens the illusion of control entirely. If observation without resistance brings such immediate transformation, what exactly makes resistance return? What mechanism pulls you back into judgment, collapsing the field once more? The answer lies in a single hidden habit that runs through every human mind, the instinct to divide what is seen into good and bad, to measure instead of witness. And it is in understanding this habit, the subtle poison of judgment, that the next revelation begins to unfold. Judgment is the subtlest form of resistance. It disguises itself as discernment, analysis, or intelligence. Yet every judgment divides the field into fragments. The instant you label something as right or wrong, good or bad, your observation stops being neutral. The wave collapses prematurely. You don't see reality anymore. You see your evaluation of it. Judgment turns the fluidity of experience into static. Science and spirituality, though they speak in different tongues, converge here. Both reveal that observation untainted by bias produces the most accurate results. In physics, this is evident in the principle of non-interference. The less you disturb a system, the more faithfully you can measure its behavior. In consciousness, the same holds true. The less you impose narrative or emotion upon what you perceive, the more clearly reality reveals itself. Judgment is disturbance, a subtle act of interference that alters the pattern being observed. When you judge, your brain's predictive machinery activates. The mind rushes to categorize, to fit new data into old frameworks. This process happens in milliseconds. The prefrontal cortex lights up. The limbic system tags the event as safe or dangerous, desirable or threatening. The nervous system prepares a reaction before awareness even notices. The body tightens, the field constricts, and coherence drops. You're no longer witnessing the event, you're interacting with your own projection of it. Observation without judgment, on the other hand, suspends this automatic categorization. The sensory data remains intact. You begin to perceive the world as it actually moves, not as you imagine it should. Neuroscientists studying meditation call this non-dual awareness, a state where the brain's default mode network, the circuitry responsible for self-referential thought, temporarily deactivates. In its place, regions governing present-moment perception and empathy become dominant. The result is measurable: increased gamma coherence, reduced stress hormones, and improved heart-brain synchronization. But the inner experience feels simpler than all the data suggests. It feels like stillness, an effortless seeing that includes everything without dividing it. The spiritual traditions call this pure awareness, not the sterile void of detachment, but a vibrant openness where opposites coexist. Suffering and peace, loss and love, shadow and light, all held within one field without rejection. This is observation without resistance, the point where science and mysticism overlap perfectly. The observer becomes the environment itself, participating without controlling. You don't send energy or attract outcomes, you become transparent enough for coherence to do its natural work. In practical terms, this shift transforms daily life. A difficult conversation no longer triggers defense, it becomes information. A setback stops being a verdict and turns into data, an observation to integrate rather than a problem to fix. The field stays fluid because awareness stays whole. The moment you stop labeling an experience as failure, its energy reorganizes. The pattern that seemed hostile begins to reveal hidden symmetry. This is not idealism, it's physics in motion. Every label adds energy to one side of the equation, throwing the system off balance. Removing judgment restores equilibrium. The body mirrors this instantly. In non-judgment, heart rate variability increases, the subtle signature of physiological adaptability. You breathe more evenly. The mind slows and perception widens. From a quantum perspective, it's as if the probability field becomes less constrained, allowing new outcomes to emerge. You stop collapsing reality into rigid shapes through preference, and instead allow the field to express its own intelligence. This is the true fusion of science and spirit, recognizing that consciousness itself obeys universal laws. Coherence, neutrality, and resonance aren't just spiritual ideals, they're measurable dynamics. The brain's neural synchrony, the heart's electromagnetic rhythm, the quantum waves collapse, they all describe the same phenomenon at different scales. When judgment disappears, coherence extends from neurons to cosmos. The observer and the observed rejoin in the same frequency of order. But letting go of judgment doesn't mean abandoning discernment. It means observing the data before deciding what it means. Discernment arises naturally when awareness has full access to information. Judgment, by contrast, occurs when awareness collapses too soon, when fear or desire interrupt the observation. One leads to clarity, the other to distortion. This difference defines whether you're creating reality consciously or by default. The challenge is that judgment feels protective. It gives the ego a sense of control, a quick answer to uncertainty. Yet that false safety is precisely what blocks transformation. The field can only reshape when you stop clinging to premature conclusions. The paradox is that truth doesn't need your agreement to exist. It only needs your observation. The more purely you observe, the faster distortion resolves itself. And yet, beyond this stillness, there's an even deeper consequence, one most people never consider. When you begin to live without judgment, something fundamental shifts in your identity. You realize that it's not the external world changing first, it's you. The inner architecture of perception transforms, and the field mirrors that shift like glass returning to transparency. What happens next is the ultimate revelation. The discovery that reality doesn't rearrange to meet your expectations, it simply reflects the new coherence you've become. The most difficult truth to accept is the simplest one. Nothing outside of you moves until something inside of you shifts. Reality does not change first, you do. Every transformation you've ever witnessed, every breakthrough you've ever experienced, began as an invisible rearrangement in the architecture of your perception. The external event is merely the after-image of that internal reconfiguration. At first glance, this seems backward. We're conditioned to believe that cause lives in the outer world, that action produces change, that effort moves mountains. But in the deeper mechanics of consciousness, causality reverses. Your nervous system, your attention, your emotional field, these are the levers that tune what you perceive as the external universe. Change begins as a microscopic realignment of awareness that ripples outward until matter has no choice but to conform. Think of it like a lens adjusting focus. The scene in front of you doesn't change, yet when the lens shifts by a fraction of a millimeter, everything comes into clarity. The world looks new not because it has transformed, but because distortion has been removed. The same process happens in consciousness. When you release resistance and judgment, the lens of perception cleans itself. You see differently, and that difference reorganizes the data of your experience. What once appeared as chaos begins to reveal coherence, not because the pattern was missing, but because you were misaligned to it. Neuroscience offers a tangible bridge for this. Every perception you have, a sound, a face, a memory, is filtered through predictive coding in the brain. Your mind doesn't receive the world directly, it predicts it. The signals from your senses are interpreted through expectations formed by past experience. When your inner model shifts, your perception of reality updates accordingly. What you call a new opportunity or synchronicity is often your reticular activating system noticing patterns it previously filtered out. In that sense, creating your reality is not a metaphor. It's perceptual mechanics. This is why change feels so paradoxical. You think you're responding to the world, but the world is responding to your state. Every event enters through the gateway of your attention and takes the shape of its container. When that container expands, life appears to expand with it. A small act of surrender, a deep breath, a softened thought, shifts the inner geometry enough to let more of reality's potential through. The moment you stop resisting, the feedback loop reverses. Instead of your emotions chasing circumstances, circumstances begin to mirror emotion. It's not that external forces suddenly obey your will, it's that coherence attracts coherence. The frequencies of your internal field align with similar frequencies in the collective field. The same principle governs everything from atoms to galaxies. Resonance organizes matter. When you change your tone, the universe around you tunes itself to match. This explains why attempts to manifest from tension fail so consistently. You can't command the field from incoherence. The vibration of effort tells reality that alignment is missing, and so reality mirrors misalignment. It's not punishment, it's precision. The field reflects not what you want, but what you are. When you become still, when observation stops oscillating between wanting and fearing, the reflection stabilizes. What looked like external transformation is only the moment you recognize yourself in the mirror. You can witness this in the smallest of shifts. One morning you wake up and respond differently to the same situation that used to irritate you. Nothing about the world changed, same words, same people, same routine, but your reaction is lighter. That subtle internal difference ripples outward. The conversation goes smoothly. Solutions appear unforced. Others sense the change and unconsciously adjust. You didn't bend reality, you recalibrated the frequency through which reality expresses itself. This is what ancient teachers meant when they said, "As within, so without." It was never metaphorical poetry, it was the original physics of consciousness. The field you inhabit is a living mirror, exact and impartial. It does not negotiate, it reflects. Every vibration of thought and emotion contributes to the structure of what you call your life. The more coherent the signal, the more fluid the reflection. The more fragmented the signal, the more chaotic the mirror. The twist then is that there's nothing to fix out there. The world doesn't wait for your control. It waits for your coherence. Change begins in the most private of spaces, a shift in perception so intimate that no one else can witness it. Yet that invisible realignment carries enough influence to alter timing, relationships, even probabilities themselves. When you finally understand this, effort becomes reverence. You stop forcing life to move, and instead allow yourself to move with it. You become less of a participant in a random universe and more of a frequency inside a vast, intelligent field. And it's in that field, silent, precise, immediate, where the true transformation happens. Because the second you shift, the universe doesn't need convincing. It simply adjusts its reflection. But this understanding opens one final frontier, one few are willing to face. If reality is an exact mirror of inner coherence, then every distortion you perceive is also feedback, not punishment but guidance. What if the friction in your life isn't resistance from the universe, but an invitation from it? What if every unwanted pattern is simply your own field asking to be seen with clearer awareness? The answer to that question begins where all change truly starts, in the quiet act of observation itself. The moment you stop trying to control reality, it stops mirroring resistance and begins reflecting truth. Change doesn't start with effort, it starts with clarity. When you observe without judgment, the noise fades, coherence returns, and the universe responds in kind. What shifts is not the world, but the awareness perceiving it. The observer and the observed become one continuous field, moving in rhythm instead of opposition. That's the silent point where manifestation stops being theory and becomes lived experience, where life reorganizes itself the instant you let it. If you've reached this far, write in the comments, "I see clearly now." It's a simple phrase, but it signals that awareness has taken the lead. And if this message resonated with you, choose one of the videos appearing on your screen. It continues exactly where this realization begins.